No announcements this evening. We'll move on to item 1, which will be the Board of Education teachers contract. This time, Mr. Seabury.
Mr. Mayor, excuse me, for the record, I'll speak on piece again. I cannot vote in this. I have to recuse myself as I still am a teacher, also as my wife.
Let the record reflect that Mr. Seabury has recused himself from voting on this item, and Mr. Arconti has recused himself from voting on this item. Any other recusals? Okay. Seeing none, then at this time, what's your pleasure, Council, on item 1? Ms. Tysons.
Thank you, Your Honor. I'd like to approve the recommendations of the committee.
It's been approved to adopt the recommendations of the Committee of the Whole. Is there a second on that motion?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Negashov. Mrs. Stanley. Second by Mrs. Stanley. She's a little quicker than Mr. Negashov. Is there any discussion about adopting the recommendations of the Committee of the Whole? Mr. Shinisi.
Thank you. And through the chair, either anybody from the attorney for the Board of Ed or our Corporation Council can answer this. The arbitration process. I know it was mentioned during the public session portion of the meeting, but the process of the arbitration, does the city of Danbury actually submit a proposal, or does the Board of Education act?
Once the legislative body rejects the contract, the Board of Education then continues the negotiations. It goes to arbitration. If you were to reject the arbitrated award, so let's say, for example, you rejected this, went to arbitration, the arbitration panel, and the award came back to you within 25 days. And in that case, you rejected by a 2/3 vote. At that point, the statement of reasons as to the rejection would come from the legislative body, with the board having the option of giving those reasons. But if you reject this evening, then what will happen is, as of tomorrow morning, the arbitration process, as we discussed earlier, will start clicking. And the Board of Education then will have the responsibility of negotiating on behalf of the town of Danbury this arbitration, which means half the cost of the arbitrators as well as any other fees.
Again, to follow up what the mayor said, if we as a council don't have an input of what we would like to see, wouldn't the Board of Education just follow up what they already approved? What would make them come to a lower amount when they already approved something that's higher? Where's the offset?
Well, let me speak from personal experience. I'm a Board of Education in my community, and I had a similar circumstance. What governs you is the ability, the reasoning of working together as one community and trying to represent the people that have elected you. The Board of Education, really, I'm kind of puzzled because I don't know what the incentive would be to just go through an arbitration process and not contest it. I don't see the game.
If I could just follow up, Mr. Shinisi, the board and the attorneys for the board will file briefs arguing, I'm sure, very strongly the recent economic conditions that have erupted. That'll probably be an essential component to the board's arguments as to the rationale of the legislative body's rejections. And that'll be up to the arbitration panel to determine what weight they're going to give the most recent economic upheaval that we've seen. I think that would, without divulging, it's no secret that's what's going to happen.
And just if I may, Your Honor, two things. One is certainly members of the group, the town elected officials, are entitled to work with the Board of Education and certainly participate and certainly attend the arbitration hearing, and indeed they may be called to testify for all I know. The second thing is also keep in mind, which I don't know that's been discussed, is the arbitration that takes place is a last best offer arbitration. So it's not as if, for example, let's suppose, for example, the teacher student said I want a 4% increase and the board said 2. All they can do is pick 4 or 2. They don't get to choose 3. And so one of the things that becomes paramount in any kind of arbitration, underbiting arbitration, is identification of the issues, as well as you're strategizing in terms of how to set those issues out. The other piece is the whole contract is being rejected. So certainly one of the first things that Council for the Board of Education do, working with the union, will try to identify those issues which we actually want to go to arbitration over. If one side insists that it's all the issues, then frankly, everything will be on the table. That's one of the identification of issues and how you strategize is a big component of this.
But again, follow up here is, I can't speak for the other council people, but I don't object to all the provisions in this contract. I think it's just the overall effect of the contract on the city as a whole that we object to.
Right.
I mean, I wouldn't have a problem approving this if the Board of Education would come back and say, we can put this in and have very minimal teacher layoffs. Then I wouldn't have any problems at all approving this contract, but it's not coming back that way.
I understand that.
I will hear the negative impact of this contract. But could one of the suggestions be that it just, instead of being a 2-year contract, just a 1-year contract?
Certainly the duration could be one of the issues that will undoubtedly, unless the parties agree to it ahead of time, that can be an issue that is arbitrary. That was an issue that was agreed to originally. My only point was not suggesting one way or the other in terms of the reasoning why people are voting against it, but simply understanding the legal effect of once the contract is rejected, potentially every issue that was agreed to is on the table. Okay.
Any other discussion? We'll start with Mr. Levy and work our way down towards Mr. Rotella.
Thank you, Your Honor. I just want to reiterate the same thing. We're really rolling the dice in arbitration. I have deep questions as far as the outcome of what the board and how they got, where they got, but I know that there's many issues involved contained within that contract, and from the numbers I heard this evening on binding arbitration, I think one of the lowest numbers I heard was a 3.7%. And it's going to be pretty much what happened with the administrators, as I understand it, was the last best offer of 4.5%. So that when we go through this, it may very well cost the city, the taxpayers, more money than what you're currently looking at. And I think the contract was negotiated in good faith, and at this late time, I just don't see where we have the knowledge to, because we didn't participate in this contract, to really vote it down. I think that we have an opportunity when we formulate the budget to give the Board of Education the amount of money the community can afford. And if they committed to an expensive contract, then it's up to them to figure out how they're going to work with their own school board budget to make it fit the affordability of the community. So I think that this is somewhat of an act of brutality in rejecting this contract that very well could cost the taxpayers more money.
Thank you, Mr. Lee. Mr. Rotella.
Thanks, Your Honor. Through the chair to Les Pender, Corporation Counsel.
Pretty better.
Let's assume it's going to go to arbitration. And let's further assume, and this may not be an assumption, it's actually a question, who is going to be controlling arbitration for the city of Danbury? Will that be us, your office, or will that indeed be the board?
The board, together with its counsel.
The board, together with counsel.
Represented by its attorney, the board attorney.
Represented not by our attorneys, but by the board's attorney.
Right.
And we've already heard from the board tonight, they want this contract. What guarantee do we have that if we send the board off to arbitration, they are going to fulfill it, or at least attempt to fulfill the will of this council? Do we have any guarantee of that?
Because this kind of, the use of the statute is relatively, is quite rare, in fact. It's hard to say what the board, having been here tonight, listening to all the comments, questions, and issues that you brought up, it's hard to say what they will bring back into that arbitration process, but certainly there'll be some information. There may be some supportive information that the Councilman Rotella, no real guarantees, But being that the council convened tonight, the council was heard, asked questions, people heard the concerns, presumably some of that will be reflected back through the process into the arbitration panel.
But still, the point is, and it's an important point, this body is not hiring an arbitrator to fulfill our destiny at some state level. That's not what's going to happen.
Right.
Okay. All right, my next question is, does anybody know what the last best offer was? Elio, Sal, Dr. Pasquale, please.
You have before you the mediated agreement. That's an offer. If it were to be rejected this evening, that is the work, the serious work we would have to undergo and make that determination. You know, if you make an offer that is ridiculous, you will lose. You need to make a reasonable last best offer. And I don't know what that is tonight. The board would have to make that determination with its negotiating team, with the attorney. We'd have to look at settlements, look at the contract. That was a wonderful point. There are many things within that contract that are back on the table that we fought to get to that number. And then we'd have to make a determination at that point. So we don't have that right now. What you have before you is the agreed upon mediated amount. Obviously, we went to a mediator because we needed it, because we couldn't get to what we thought we wanted to go, and the teachers couldn't get to where they wanted to go.
If I could just interject there, having been through the arbitration process, there's a series of factors that are used. It's not just one factor. It's not just they're going to go by the last best offer. That's it. They're going to look at all the different factors that played in, and they're going to also look at what we call the history of negotiations. That will be all the transcripts from all the meetings, all the counteroffers and counter proposals that flew back and forth about how to structure the contract. Then we'll file briefs based on that and based on the discussion I'm sure that's happened here tonight, the attorneys will. And then the arbitrators will hear the case. They may call on people to testify, they may not, depending on what's contested, and make a decision. So you can't just say, you know, if it's 6%, 8%, it's going to be one or the other. Yes, it'll be either 6 or 8, but there's a whole bunch of factors that will go in there to determine what that last best actually was. And that's, a lot of that is a history of negotiations. I'm just saying I've been through it. So, so I didn't mean to.
Thank you. Finally, do we have an idea of what this would cost? An idea. You know, I'm not going to hold you to this, but I mean, we've heard 14,000 to 140,000. There's got to be, you know, some.
Yeah, the high end of that would probably be somewhat questionable, but it'll be in the couple of maybe $20,000, give or take in that range, I suppose. But you don't know because it depends on how extended the process is, how tense it is. But perhaps that's a starting point to figure either or, a little bit less, a little bit more than that.
Police was, remember that was a highly contested contract. That was a full-blown, every item was on the table, lasted days, ran us about $33,000.
And that would be considered high?
That was, we had Saran Murray, who was, God love her, but she was about $400 an hour.
Okay. Thank you.
We're a little bit less than that, though.
I'm sure would be good.
That's right. Don't tell Saran I said that. So I'm going to get a call in the morning. Just strike that from the record. Further discussion, Mr. Sadi.
Thank you, Your Honor. My approach to this is trying to figure out a way to keep all the teachers, not to lay them off. Mr. Levy mentioned limited funds. Another member of the public spoke here tonight and explained and answered actually more clearly than other people who were asked tonight about what the impact would be of the layoffs. Potential increases in class sizes and a limited delivery of the current services that are delivered. We have limited funds. I don't agree with the salaries paid to the cabinet. I don't agree with the salaries paid to the administrators. The list I have is a conglomeration of 16 different positions. That's why I have difficulty distinguishing who is in what group. But that group of 16 people makes up almost $2 million in salaries and total compensation in a package, not including the healthcare benefits. But other members of this council have mentioned that we have limited funds and, well, we'll just give them the limited funds to the Board of Ed when that time comes and let them decide how many people are going to lay off. I'm not going to vote for something that I know we most likely can't fund and force someone else to lay off based on a limited amount of funds. I would hope that somehow all the parties could figure out a way to go back voluntarily. I know they're not required to by law, many of them, and figure out a way to handle the situation, even in the short term. I'm a public employee, and we're dealing with the same thing at the state level. You know, another issue here is already I'm getting emails on my BlackBerry about the disappointment in my vote tonight. But I think it's appropriate that we vote our conscience. I know a lot of people are going to be upset with that. I hope that all parties will take this vote back, not just teachers, but everyone involved in the school system. And on the city side, we're going to have cuts as well. I'm sure those are coming down the pike. Some people were even blogging about the cuts on the News Times website and about the union contracts and the percentages that are indicated in there. Won't mention them here tonight. But, you know, on behalf of my fellow council people, this is not easy when after the last meeting, I don't know what they each meant, some people from the Board of Ed said thank you. Now, if they said thank you just for being here and going through this process, I understand it. If they said thank you because of your vote, I have a hard time accepting that when the board's public position is this is an appropriate contract and they agree with it, but then they leave the council members up here biting the bullet. Now, if they didn't mean it that way, I understand. If it was just thank you for your service, fine. But that's exactly what we're up here as. We're not part of the negotiating process, but we're asked to make a decision here. And it's very difficult to swallow under the statutory scheme, but I know we have an obligation to do that, and that's what I'm going to do tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chinese.
I just want to echo Councilman Sadi's comments that, you know, we do have to look at this. I'm going to mention something in the public session here, that we got to take a risk assessment. And I am taking a risk assessment here, that if we take a high risk, that we would have to pay $2 million or so a year. A low risk, which I don't think we're ever going to have, that would be less. I'm looking for more, as it goes in arbitration, more of a moderate risk, that the union and the board are working together to form a contract that the city could afford. And I think we all need to work together on this to figure out where we can all be comfortable in doing it. And which is why I'm going to see if it's possible that the city can lend and pay for the arbitrator if it's not an ethical violation, if we can so do that. Can that be something we can do to help the Board of Education out since their budget's so limited?
No.
Is that considered an ethical violation?
Not an ethical violation. We'd have to make an appropriation. Look, you know, if there's significant overruns, you know, as always, I've worked with Ilio and Dr. Sal at the end of the year to button everything up so that they're in balance. You know, if their budget comes down to a $40,000 deficit because of arbitration, you know, I'll work with Dr. Pascarella about that, and we're not going to let them hang a deficit. But let's let them try to fund it out of their own budget first before we. But thank you. Mr. Perkins, was your hand up? Okay.
Thank you, Honor. I too agree with many of the things that Councilman Sadi said and Councilman Shinisi also. I was on the other side of this type of vote, but at the state level. My salary was frozen, and I made the sacrifice. I don't want to speak for the other council members, but I also don't want to come off looking like a jaded elected official who's only concerned with dollars and cents. But I believe we need to make some sacrifices now, and that's one of the reasons why I decided to wanted to take another look at this contract. So I'm just sticking with my vote.
Mr. Perkins, anybody else on that end? Mr. Curran.
Yeah, I'd just like to continue with what my other councilman said. You know, when the meeting got over a little while ago, I took a beating from a couple of people that I thought were friends of mine who were teachers. I come from a family of teachers. I was a teacher before I became a fireman. My brother died in the classroom. My wife taught for 26 years. My sister-in-law retired from teaching. I love teachers. This isn't about teachers. This is about keeping our city going. And I'm talking to department heads throughout the city, and they're all talking about cutting their budgets next year. They're going down 5%, 10%, some of the departments. We got to run a whole city. It's not just the school system. The school system takes a lot of money, $111 million last year. Now they want more money this year. Everybody wants more money, but these are bad times. These are terrible times. And I'm going to have to stick with my vote. And I lost a few friends. I guess they weren't my friends anyway. Thank you.
other discussion? Mr. Cobb.
Thank you. I would also like to echo the sentiments of several of my council members up here tonight. And one of the things that I'm hopeful for is that the Board of Education and the Teachers Union will be able to get back together and talk about some of the negotiation points here that were mentioned tonight and hopefully settle them before going into binding arbitration. I think, as Mr. Brogue said, is a possibility that they could agree to sit down and talk about this before it goes into an arbitration process as part of the process. So I'm hopeful that that is going to happen. And one of the other things that was mentioned that I'm concerned about is, was giving the Board of Ed a fixed amount of money if they've approved this contract and letting them deal with it. Well, the problem is that the fixed cost will always get paid. So where will that shortfall wind up? It'll wind up in the classroom with our students, and I'm just not willing to do that. 82% of this budget that goes to the Board of Ed is for benefits and salaries. And for years on the council, I kept saying, what about the kids? So I cannot support it based on that fact. I don't want to see the board be forced into supplying this money towards salaries and benefits and letting that money come from the money that goes towards our children. So I won't be supporting that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cabo. With the council's discretion, I'd like to turn the mythical gavel over to Mr. Cabo just for a few quick remarks, if that's possible. Any objection? Thank you. I just want to, first of all, thank everybody that came out tonight. I understand how stressful this is. I think this council has pretty much articulated that this really isn't about teachers, it's more about what our ability to pay. We're so proud of our public school system, we're proud of our Board of Education, what goes on there and all the hard work that they do, as well as every single classroom teacher. As somebody that's been in the classroom for 15 years, I clearly understand the stresses you're under every day. I know it, I've lived it, I've been there. I work with a lot of people that were in this room tonight. And so let me just say this. Tomorrow morning I'm going to write to the board and to Bill Murray. And in this process, if I understand it correctly, we can have one stab at mediation. An effort to get the parties to sit down, try to resolve this, to bring back a wage increase that we can support, that's fair, that recognizes that costs are going up at home as well for our staff members, that may possibly reduce layoffs within the system and protect some of those positions that we're losing. If they're willing to do that, the Board of Ed as well as the union will certainly provide whatever input we can here to help reach an amicable agreement. We'll bring that contract back here and we'll certainly adopt it in March and be able to hopefully protect some positions, help the taxpayer, and certainly at least give folks some kind of increase that they can live with, but also that the city can live with. So that's my pledge to you tonight. So with that, I'm going to take the gavel back, and if there's any other comments, seeing none then, we will go ahead forward with the vote. The motion on the table was to reject the contract as presented by the Board of Education, between the Board of Education and the Danbury. All those in favor of rejection signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposition to rejection? Nay. Nay. So please record Mr. Levy in the negative. Okay. And we have 2 abstentions, thank you. Just a reminder, Mr. Arconti and Mr. Seabury.